So, welcome to Minds in Motion with Dr. K, where we explore the lives of leaders and business owners who are changing the world in this era of modern leadership. I am your host, Dr. K, and today I am joined by the esteemed Jamal Marshall, who has taken his time to come and share some things with us, to the leaders and my listeners. Jamal is, I call him the burnout guru in the mental health space. But no one else can share what they do and what their journey has been better than the person, the man himself, Jamal Marshall. So, Jamal, welcome to Minds in Motion with Dr. K.
Thanks for having me, Doc. I appreciate you.
Awesome, awesome. So, Jamal, we're going to just jump right in. And I'm going to just have you share a bit about you, what propelled you into the mental health space. I know we all have a journey. We all have, a trajectory that we on and we continue to be on to get to where we are. It seems like it's an overnight thing, but it's never an overnight thing. So would you mind sharing with us a bit about what that journey looked like that brought you to where you are now?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a very non-linear journey. Growing up, everybody, at least all little boys when I was growing up in the early 80s, wanted to be firemen, you know, wanted to help save someone. I didn't realize that what I wanted to be initially would morph into what I am today. And part of that is growing up in a pretty abusive household. Now, I realize that's not the case for everyone here under the sound of my voice and your audience. Some leaders have grown up behind the white picket fence. I had one parent that was absolutely divine, but I had another parent that was mean enough to be Satan himself, and that was my dad. So he was a heroin addict, a crack addict, and an alcoholic. However, he was very high functioning. So you could say, in the word that we hear a lot in our spaces, is high performing. And that he always had a job, always had revenue, always had money. But the way he dealt and coped with his issues was through alcohol and drugs. And it was very unpredictable growing up with him.
Yeah.
Whereas so much stuff and on home front was out of control. And so I found a way, being the youngest of four, how do I control things? And I control through excellence, because if you made one wrong move, there might be hell to pay for it. And so I made sure that everything was perfect. I didn't kick up the dust, didn't trouble the waters, made straight A's. I wasn't terribly athletic. I was semi-athletic. I'm decent at sports, but I made sure I won, no matter what I did. On any, my mom, she's that type of parent that actually went to all the conferences and took notes and stuff like that. So any feedback that she brought me, I made sure that I made course corrections on it very quickly. The feedback was never overtly negative, but anything that was said, I just made sure that I read on that and made sure I could do anything to mitigate any kickback. And so growing older, what that starts to do is it plays on your insecurity. You are excellent externally and everything. You get high praise from peers and from adults and everything like that. But internally, it is all a trauma response.
Yeah.
The very person that I looked to affirm me was the very person that when they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs, did not affirm me at all. And so why externally I looked like I was crushing it, I was being crushed on the inside.
Wow.
And this led to me I started as a youngin, started my career as a janitor, and then I was a lifeguard, easy money. But as an 18-year-old, I went into the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons off the Senate side of the Capitol here in DC. And I mean, first performance appraisal was satisfactory. From there on out, outstanding and excellent on every performance appraisal. I dotted every I, crossed every T. I was a star worker, first to get there, last to leave. Why externally that looks good? I had horrible boundaries because I never said no to anything or anyone. I even allowed people to give me their projects to do. And so I didn't realize that what this would lead me was internally being very resentful, extremely critical of other people, always in fear, always in anxiety, not really letting on that I was anxious, becoming the yes man. I had that disease to please, and it made its way into romantic relationships. It made its way into professional relationships. It colored everything I did. And so fast forward, it also led me to burning the candle at ends that didn't exist. It made its way even into my recreational life, whereas, I have faith in my background. I became very involved in that. And I was in like 7 different ministries, not to mention going to school, working for the government. And it's just almost like I remember a parent, my mom said, you come home only go to sleep when you sleep, you know? And so this narrative is from teenage to young adulthood. And I just remember getting to the point where I had an addiction to please everyone. Like that fed me. So I was a high performer. I was a high achiever, but it was only because of my own fear of rejection. And
Mm.
when you burn the candle at ends that don't exist like that, living in a city like DC, and I don't know how many of your audience can relate, that's gonna put you in the circle. You're in the inner circle.
Yeah.
But my my brain and my body started to get into a place where I was unhealthy,
Mm-hmm.
and I also began to, because of his addictions, resent my father and be very angry with him. Um, Now he came to the place where in 2006 he came to faith, and in 2009 his life had completely changed, but it was a lot of damage and residual damage already done.
Yeah.
So when I had stopped working for the government, I graduated with uh bachelor's of science in counseling and psychology. I had gotten the highest grade I could get in the job that I had. And then something happened in HR with my paperwork, going into co-op where they said, gosh, we there's been a mistake made, and we're gonna have to, release you, which was weird because they could not figure out why. I wasn't fired, but they said you kind of seemingly have worked yourself out of a job. And even my supervisor was like, it's nothing that I can actually do about this because, you've gotten the highest grade you're going to get, which was so strange. But I really see the hand of God in that I needed help. I was so broken on the inside. I mean, they gave me a going away. It was crazy. The director of the whole United States Federal Bureau of Prisons came to my going away. Like, that's just, the impact that I had left there. And people are like, I can't believe they're not keeping you. You've never missed a performance appraisal. But I got to see that it was time for me to stop performing and time for me to actually get help myself. And
Wow.
so while not, I was out of school, I wasn't working, that was my opportunity to then go away into the Midwest for 7 months for inpatient counseling myself. I sorted out and I said, I need help. You know, I
Mhm.
really, I was in so much bitterness and unforgiveness with my father. I was starting to blame people for my own choices. I started to get addicted to prescription drugs and other addictions that I had that I was like putting on other people. It's like, Jamal, you're responsible as a man. You're now 24, 25. These are your choices. This was back in 2009. And after that 7 months, I mean, I got taken through the ringer through a counselor who really was very patient, very gracious, and began to isolate some of the root causes of what was going on inside of me. And then they invited me back 6 months to do an internship. The first words out of my mouth were, because this was in the Midwest, I was like, there aren't really any black people around here. I was like, yeah. And I wasn't raised, I was raised in a very culturally balanced household, but I was used to, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm from LA. I've lived most of my life in DC, so I'm used to being around a melting pot, and it was not that way there.
Right.
So coming back, that was an internship, and I had a mentor that further reinforced a lot of the things that I was learning. All the while, they started training me to become certified as a counselor. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's I have to fast forward in interest of time, but those are a lot of things that led me to who I am today. But even during that time, when they brought me back on staff, I started in administration and then they brought me into counseling in 2013. I remember carrying such a heavy caseload, and doing so much because I was also doing public speaking, I was doing promotion, I was traveling, I was going to other countries. Um, I remember from that standpoint telling them, there's certain things that I'm not going to be able to do because they also had me going into prisons because of the background I had at Department of Justice. And we had like 15 staff members leave.
Wow.
And I stepped up in responsibility. I started also managing a remote, other contractors that were doing remote counseling. I put together a whole training for that. And it seemed almost like nothing was good enough. I
For you
remember
or for the organization?
for the organization. And I remember the CEO, actually one of the directors, pulling me into his office, and he says, "It seems like other people don't have enough access to you." And I mean, I was floored. I was just like, I'm one of the most accessible staff members here. And it took me a time to just like kind of sit back and say, is there some merit to what he's saying? Or is there something that I need to, is there a narrative that I've created that you can always access Jamal? So I had to own that. And in
Mm.
owning that, I had to even go further and say, okay, even in your training as a counselor and all the stuff, the root causes that you have isolated, what are you missing? And how are you still allowing your insecurities to actually inform your actions and how you go about, with staff, with clients?
Wow.
Yeah.
Whew. Man, I have so many questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, let's do the best we can.
you just shared a mouthful, and as I'm listening to you, one of the questions I had, where did you get that resilience? Because you didn't have an example in your dad. Where did you get the resilience to do things with excellence, to know I got to master the craft, whatever I put my hands to? Where did you get that?
I'll just answer your question really directly, and I don't know if this will resonate with your audience, but my faith is huge. That resilience comes from God, man. I can't
I'm
put it
with
on any of the
I'm with
source. I can't
you.
say the universe. I can't say a crystal or rock. It comes from
Yeah.
God. It comes from Yahweh. That my faith is huge. So when you look at my profile, you look at any awards I've gotten, anything I've accomplished, what we've done with clients, I just say it's God and me. I'm just a vehicle that, that God is using
Me,
to
right?
help.
God
Yes.
did. You had to tap into that. And that's important. So don't feel any way of talking about that because I am also a woman of faith. So I understand that. But I just wanted to hear that from you. Because there's probably others who might be listening and they'd be like, well, how did he do this? Right. So now they know. And I don't know if you're familiar with positive psychology
Yes,
or
I'm trying to that.
positive intelligence. And as I listen to you, I hear the saboteurs that were showing up, the avoider and the pleaser and the hyperachiever and the hyper rational, because they kind of like all the intermingling together, to mask all of this stuff that was going on the inside. So for you to kind of like come out of that, we want to kind of step into that phase, what that was like, because that's heavy. That's a lot of heavy stuff mentally. And to be carrying it on the outside world looking at it like, oh, he's doing this with grace. But when you get home and turn the key is like turmoil, right?
Yeah.
Literally like self-medicating in excellence because that's the way I got to cover this thing up. I can't let anybody know. So I have to go, if they go in 10, I got to go 20, right? Because this, I gotta go that extra mile. But the end result of that, I guess, is kind of like what got you into where you are. Because I am sure when I listen to all of that and how we were this high performer, high achiever, high everything, the brain had to get fatigued, the body had to get tired, and then that's the burnout. So I want to hear more about that whole burnout piece, even as I know you are like a very, very successful business owner right now, but it took a path to get you there. It took a journey to get you there. And of course, your fate helped to propel you into your next, right? Burnout is so real. And you're not talking about burnout from a theoretical space. You're talking
Mhm.
about burnout from a lived experience. So
Right.
that's why I coined you the guru of burnout, right? Because you can speak to that. You probably can spot it, even somebody's talking and to seeing how they show up in their emotion because you've lived through that. So, what would you say is the most common sign of burnout? And how can someone differentiate them from general stress, especially with this new generation that we have, the Gen Zs and the millennials, and I coach leaders all day long, every day. And the burnout is real. And, they don't understand. They're like, I just don't know how I feel. I just don't want to go to work today. It's Monday already. Is it Friday yet? Because they don't understand what's going on, right? In that whole chemistry of the brain and the body. So can you share with us what are the common signs that some people need to look out so they can differentiate? This is just like, because we have eustress, right? We have good stress. And then we
Mhm.
have that stress that can really stress you out.
Right.
um, how do you can someone differentiate that if you don't mind sharing
Oh,
that?
no problem. That's a great question, Doc. I don't think there's a most common signs. I think there's various signs depending on the person, their makeup, their culture, the background. But I would say some of the common signs to differentiate stress from actual burnout is a lack of non-negotiables and a lack of non-defined non-negotiables. You hear that word a lot, especially in the business space. Most people have never sat down and defined their non-negotiables. That's one of the things I do with clients. We actually write it out. And some people are like, oh, they don't even know, like, well, what are my non-negotiables? It's like where's the value system that is feeding these non-negotiables, and how does that manifest itself in action? And I remember sharing with a client a couple of years ago, and she never forgot it. She said, Jamal, I wanted to punch you in the face when you said it, but you were so right. I said, non-negotiables that are renegotiated are not non-negotiables. It's a phrase that I've coined and trademark. And so constant renegotiation is going to be an on-ramp to burnout, because you are actually acquiescing to everyone around you to renegotiate, to put them in a winning position. Stephen Covey has a term called the win-win. You know, a lot of times those who are on their way to burnout, or if I lose, you win. And I'm okay with that, because it's being informed by their trauma. And at the root of that, the deep root of that is a fear of rejection. Another sign of burnout, let's just say in a profession, from a career space or even a business space. First one to get there, last one to leave. Externally, they may look very diligent. That is actually a sign of poor time management. You're actually not managing your time. And if you're when you haven't defined your non-negotiables and you're letting everyone punt their projects and their work to you, or load you down with unnecessary conversation throughout the day without kind of putting a stop to that, because you don't want to kick up the dust, you don't want to trouble the waters, you don't want to offend, you're actually putting yourself in a losing position. Also, not challenging the status quo of what has been handed to you career-wise. If you think about, like, I can tell you in many cases, I have some stories, man, where at an organization that I worked at, people were punting their projects to me. I would work on their projects and they would get bonuses because I wasn't challenging it. I was everyone's yes man. It's like, oh, you want me to do that? I was doing legal work that I wasn't even trained in. I was also doing visa work. I mean, how am I, a person trained, in the counseling, trained for the mind, trained for mentoring, supposed to get someone into another country? That's not even my job classification. But again, I wasn't using my KPIs. It's like, okay, this is why you all onboarded me. This is why you hired me. This is why you hire a said person, and it's their job. Now, long story short, in the future, I did put my foot down. And when you put your foot down, you're going to lose some people. But those who are burning out, they rarely put their foot down, because the fear of the rejection, the fear of the consequence, the fear of what is unknown on the other side of that boundary is definitely what's fueling their output. Also, another sign is not delegating, the fear of delegating. You hear the word excellence a lot. It's like, if you can't do excellent, if you can't do it the way I want to do it, I don't know if I trust you with it. That may be that person's job. And you train leaders. I do executive coaching and counseling for leaders. And that's part of the work that we do with them. Is just like, if you have a fear of delegating and you have to have your hands on everything, you're going to burn out. You onboarded that person for that. Why do you have your hands in their project?
That rejection, right? That fear of letting go. So what I'm hearing is that fear, which I like to call false evidence, appearing real, FEAR, of that rejection, is one of the root causes that can lead to burnout. Because again, it's that inability to say no, to negotiate my terms, to set those boundaries, is what causes people to get trapped into that rejection, taking on more than they can, not wanting to delegate out, and then the burnout begins, right? And the crash and burn happens. And a lot of times it goes undetected because they never seek the help. And even while I'm on that, I want to kind of segue a little bit into something that I want to piggyback off of that. For most men, especially of color, how many of them in your practice are seeking the support they need for that burnout, because it's part of mental health? Do you find that men of color, is a taboo for them, that I'm good, nothing's wrong with me, I'm cool, and they're not seeking that help or support they need? Are you finding that?
I've definitely found that, but I've also found, especially in this day and age, post 2020, that the stigma is slowly coming off of, like, what does it look like for a person of color to seek help? I had a client who was actually a top manager at Honda, who saw me on a live and he said, I need you to coach me. And we worked together for 2 whole cycles. He was just like, and now he's actually left Honda and he's running his own business. And he's running his business in the mental health space. It's just amazing how that happened, how he made that transition from being a top salesperson and a manager and a leader managing a bunch of direct reports to running his own business. But he had to get to the point where he made himself vulnerable and got to get to that place where one of the things we went through was actually understanding culturally, he had a lot of issues with I come with all these great ideas. I know what's best for the company, and I never seem to get a reaction out of my lighter counterpart. And I took him through a project called High Context versus Low Context Cultures. It's like every culture doesn't emote or react the same. But when you have this in your mind, you go to work bringing your best foot forward and you feel like it's not appreciated, your mind is already going 120 miles per hour when it should probably be going 50 to 70.
Mhm.
Those things can produce burnout. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it sure did. Um, would you say also that this generation, they're much more vulnerable than the previous generations? So would you think that's probably one of the reasons they are more open to seeks help or support when it comes to mental health or burnout? Um, would you say that might be a true statement?
I would say with that, we're in the age of information and they have more access. Let's just say you and I, we were coming up in the late 70s, 80s. We just didn't have access to that type of information.
Mhm.
And a lot of the things that we seek and give help for were still stigmatized. Whereas now people are starting to realize it at the turn of century, you know, the industrial age, though it's still, and I know you see this in your coaching, I see it in mine, the industrial age still has a big bearing on the
Mhm.
professional arena, on corporate spaces. But it's also people are starting to see with the great resignation, like, okay, there are folks, you've lost some golden gooses because you're keeping them under that industrial mindset. And they realize, like, I don't have to stay here.
Yeah, absolutely. That mindset shift, if it doesn't happen, they're going to have that revolving door constantly happening in the corporate arena. So, in your experience, what are some effective strategies for managing or preventing burnout in some of these high pressure careers? I coach high performers a lot, but yet they're high performers, but they high functioning. But as you say, deep down at the root, there's some things that's happening there that is not being attended to, right? So, what were some effective strategies for managing or preventing that in some of those high pressure careers?
Yeah, when it comes to preventing burnout, that's kind of a funny one because most people who are in that phase don't even really realize it. Hindsight, unfortunately, is 2020. By the time a person's gotten to me, I'm gonna say this. This is not gonna sound very kind. They tried BetterHelp. They've tried all the mainline marketable stuff, and they realize, like, wait a minute, I need someone to actually isolate the root causes of my subconscious. And so most people who are in either in burnout or headed to burnout and headed towards that brick wall, once they realize, okay, I'm actually really short with my family, my health is actually starting to decline. I actually no longer love what I do. I'm actually starting to resent the very assignment I have, and I'm staying in this cycle. One of the things to preventative or a measure of care is to actually hire a coach or a counselor who can isolate the root causes of your subconscious. You know, uh, I know we're going to probably get there to different modalities, but most of us counselors are trained in CBT. Who's not trained in cognitive behavioral therapy? It's great. It works. I've been trained in it. My unique modality is I work on the belief that informs your behavior. We can work on your behavior until the cows come home. And yes, you'll go through a program. You'll get some temporary results. But when you work with Jamal, I'm going to actually accelerate your growth because we're going to work on the belief that's actually fueling that behavior. We're going down to the subconscious of things you didn't even know was there. And I
Yeah,
think that's important for people, especially high performing and high functioning people. They
yeah,
don't even realize that they've been coping. Like, I never shame a person when they come to me. We only know what we know. I only know what I know. I only knew what I knew. We have to actually unlearn and
and
then
yeah,
relearn. And it takes time.
yeah. But then the thing is too, like you become comfortable functioning in the dysfunction. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like there's an issue because it's literally a blind spot. And even from your story that you shared at the beginning, this is something that stemmed from childhood. This is not something that happened in the workplace.
No.
It's something that came It could, from childhood, it could be from a teacher, a parent, a family member that spoke those things that's still in the subconscious and comes up for you as a trigger. And so then now it's just, as you say, that root cause of that the burnout is just a part of that whole process that's showing itself in that way, but that's not because I'm working too much, or it's all that stuff that's causing that, the pleaser, the avoider, the non-negotiable that you refuse to negotiate, right? All those things add up and causes you now to start burning out, and until you go and find that person that can uncover that and get you unstuck and shift that mindset, nothing happens, right? As they say, you cannot overcome what you don't confront.
No.